Chapter 7 of The Dragon and the Raven by G.A. Henty. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Mike Harris. The Dragon and the Raven by G.A. Henty. Chapter 7 The Dragon. The Danes at Exeter, being now cut off from all hope of relief, asked for terms, and the king granted them their lives on condition of their promising to leave Wessex and not to return. This promise they swore by their most solemn oaths to observe, and marched northward, passed out of Wessex, and settled near Gloucester. Some of the Saxons thought that the king had been wrong in granting such easy terms, but he pointed out to the ealdorman, who remonstrated with him, that there were many other and larger bands of Danes in Mercia and Anglia, and that had he massacred the band at Exeter, and this he could not have done without the loss of many men, as assuredly the Danes would have fought desperately for their lives, the news of their slaughter would have brought upon him fresh invasions from all sides. By this time all resistance to the Danes in Mercia had ceased. Again and again King Burhred had bought them off, but this only brought fresh hordes down upon him, and at last, finding the struggle hopeless, he had gone as a pilgrim to Rome, where he had died. The Danes acted in Mercia as they had done in Northumbria. They did not care themselves to settle down for any length of time, and therefore appointed a weak Saxon thane, Ceolwulf, as the king of Mercia. He ruled cruelly and extorted large revenues from the landowners, and robbed the monasteries, which had escaped destruction, of their treasures. The Danes suffered him to pursue this course until he had amassed great wealth, when they swooped down upon him, robbed him of all he possessed, and took away the nominal kingship he had held. As there was now but little fresh scope for plundering in England, many of the Danes, both in Anglia and Mercia, settled down in the cities and on the lands which they had taken from the Saxons. The Danes who had gone from Exeter were now joined by another band which had landed in South Wales. The latter, finding but small plunder was to be obtained among the mountains of that country, moved to Gloucester, and joining the band there, proposed a fresh invasion of Wessex. The Danes, in spite of the oaths they had sworn to Alfred and the hostages they had left in his hands, agreed to the proposal, and early in the spring of 878 the bands, swollen by reinforcements from Mercia, marched into Wiltshire and captured the royal castle of Chippenham on the Avon. From this point they spread over the country and destroyed everything with fire and sword. A general panic seized the inhabitants. The better class, with the bishops, priests, and monks, made for the seacoasts and sent across to France, taking with them all their portable goods, with the relics, precious stones, and ornaments of the churches and monasteries. Another party of Danes in 23 ships had landed in Devonshire. Here the ealdorman Ada had constructed a castle similar to that which Edmund had built. It was fortified by nature on 3 sides, and had a strong rampart of earth on another. The Danes tried to starve out the defenders of the fort, but the Saxons held out for a long time, although sorely pressed by want of water. At last they sallied out one morning at daybreak and fell upon the Danes and utterly defeated them, only a few stragglers regaining their ships. 1,000 Danes are said to have been slain at Kinwith, but this was an isolated success. In all other parts of the kingdom panic appeared to have taken possession of the West Saxons. Those who could not leave the country retired to the woods, and thence, when the Danes had passed by, leaving ruin and desolation behind them, they sallied out and again began to till the ground as best they could. Thus for a time the West Saxons, formerly so valiant and determined, sank to the condition of serfs, for when all resistance ceased, the Danes were well pleased to see the ground tilled, as otherwise they would speedily have run short of stores. At the commencement of the invasion, Edmund had marched out with his band and had inflicted heavy blows upon parties of plunderers, but he soon perceived that the struggle was hopeless. He therefore returned to Sherborne, and collecting such goods as he required, and a good store of provisions, he marched to the place where the ship had been hidden. No wandering band of Danes had passed that way, and the bushes with which she had been covered were undisturbed. These were soon removed, and a passage 3 feet deep and wide enough for the ship to pass through was dug from the deep hole in which she was lying to the river. When the last barrier was cut, the water poured in, and the Saxons had the satisfaction of seeing the vessel rise gradually until the water in the dock was level with that in the river. Then she was taken out into the stream, the stores and fittings placed aboard, and she was poled down to the mouth of the river. Egbert had gone before, and had already engaged 15 sturdy sailors to go with them. The Danes had not yet reached the sea-coast from the interior, and there was therefore no difficulty in obtaining the various equipments necessary. In a week her masts were up and her sails in position. The Dragon, as she was called, excited great admiration at the port, all saying that she was the finest and largest ship that had ever been seen there. While her fitting out had been going on, she was hove to on shore, and received several coats of paint. Edmund was loath to start on his voyage without again seeing the king, but no one knew where Alfred now was, he, on finding the struggle hopeless, having retired to the fastnesses of Somerset to await the time when the Saxons should be driven by oppression again to take up arms. At last all was ready, and the Dragon put out to sea. She was provided with oars as well as sails, but these were only to be used when in pursuit or when flying from a superior enemy. As soon as she had been long enough at sea to enable the band again to recover from the effects of sickness, the oars were got out and the men practised in their use. As in the models from which she had been built, she rowed 2 banks of oars. The one worked by men upon deck, the other through small portholes. The latter could only be used when the weather was fine. When the sea was high they were closed up and fastened. The lower deck oars were each rowed by 1 man, while the upper bank, which were longer and heavier, had each 2 men to work it. Before starting, Edmund had increased the strength of his band to 90 men, that number being required for the oars, of which the Dragon had 15 on each bank on each side. At first there was terrible splashing and confusion, but in time the men learned to row in order, and in 3 weeks after putting to sea the oars worked well in time together, and the Dragon, with her 90 rowers, moved through the water at a great rate of speed. During this time she had never been far from land, keeping but a short distance from the port from which she had sailed, as Edmund did not wish to fall in with the Danes until his crew were able to maneuver her with the best effect. When at last, satisfied that all knew their duty, he returned to port, took in a fresh supply of provisions, and then sailed away again in search of the enemy. He coasted along the shore of Hampshire and Sussex without seeing a foe, and then sailed round Kent, entered the mouth of the Thames. The Dragon kept on her way until she reached the point where the river begins to narrow, and there the sails were furled and the anchor thrown overboard to wait for Danish galleys coming down the river. On the 3rd day after they had anchored they perceived 4 black specks in the distance, and these the sailors soon declared to be Danish craft. They were rowing rapidly, having 10 oars on either side, and at their mastheads floated the Danish Raven. The anchor was got up, and as the Danes approached, the Golden Dragon, the standard of Wessex, was run up the masthead. The sails were hoisted, the oars got out, and the vessel advanced to meet the approaching Danes. These for a moment stopped rowing in astonishment at seeing so large a ship bearing the Saxon flag. Then they at once began to scatter in different directions. But the Dragon, impelled both by the wind and her 60 oars, rapidly overtook them. When close alongside the galley nearest to them, the men on the upper deck, at an order from Edmund, ran in their oars, and seizing their bows, poured a volley of arrows into the galley, killing most of the rowers. Then the Dragon was steered alongside, and the Saxons, sword in hand, leaped down into the galley. Most of the Danes were cut down at once, the rest plunged into the water and swam for their lives. Leaving the deserted galley behind, the Dragon continued the pursuit of the others, and overtook and captured another as easily as she had done the first. The other 2 boats reached the shore before they were overtaken, and those on board, leaping out, fled. The Saxons took possession of the deserted galleys. They found them, as they expected, stored full of plunder of all kinds, rich wearing apparel, drinking goblets, massive vessels of gold and silver which had been torn from some desecrated altar, rich ornaments and jewels and other articles. These were at once removed to the Dragon. Fire was applied to the boats, and they were soon a mass of flames. Then the Dragon directed her course to the 2 galleys she had first captured. They were also rifled of their contents and burned. The Saxons were delighted at the success which had attended their first venture. "We shall have rougher work next time," Egbert said. The Danes who escape will carry news to London, and we shall be having a whole fleet down to attack us.